Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Get ready for truth bombs, belly laughs, and the kind of accent that turns car into a two-syllable adventure. Here's your host, Sean.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this special edition of the Edge of Liberty. Tonight will not be a normal night. There won't be any screaming. There won't be any yelling. There won't be any story about what idiot did what. No. This is trying to revive something we used to do on SHR Media, specifically Sackheads years ago. We used to really try to find an important part of American history that would tie into the holiday. Something that would remind you of what our founders and the revolution fighters did back in the day, the colonials, and how close a lot of times we were to losing it all. And this story is no different. So please do me a favor, like and subscribe wherever you're watching from. I'd appreciate it. If you want to jump in a chat, it is open. It is a 02 AMTs in chat right now. You get a chat on YouTube is the best place to chat. Go to SHI Media, just look for the little live button, click it, come on in and have a good time. So today we're talking about crossing to the Delaware and the Battle of Trenton. You know the infamous painting, the story of Washington crossing the Delaware. But this is going to be about the actual operation, the people that did it, the weather that did it, that was there, I should say. And the fact that the real story that you'll see, how close half the people involved in the Battle of Trenton were to not, they were almost done with their enlistment. It was scary. So by the end of this, it's not just a quick story. It's not just a cool history flex, so to speak. It's going to be a reason why we have Christmas in America, and one of these absolutely just incredible stories of just patriots who did the unthinkable. You got to remember, it's 1776. There's no drones, there's no radar, there's no satellites, there's none of this stuff. All the intel was human, all the big movements was done by animal. And to get across something like the Delaware, as you'll see, was no small task, even on a good day. This Battle of Trenton matters because it shows you how important survival, not only of the individual, but of the nation was to the founders. It really was a do or die situation. And at this point in the revolution, it's late. And there was still no guarantee that we were going to win. We were not stable in our battle. We had some wins, but we were having a lot of losses, and we were running out of time, strictly. But we're also running out of supplies and manpower. And that was becoming more and more of an issue. Supply chains were down. The Brits had cut us off everywhere. So when Washington says, hey, we're going to cross the river on Christmas night, it wasn't a gimmick. It wasn't a stunt. It was a leadership decision that was made under tremendous pressure where failure wasn't an option. By the way, I learned this, and I'm going to ask everyone in the chat room if they want. I know Phantom popped in the chat, Reaver's in the chat. There was a code word that you had to use when you were discussing these plans back in 1776. If you know what it is, without Googling, go ahead and throw it in the chat. I'll just be interested. I'll reveal it here in just a minute. Before I do that, there is a great comedy skit that happens to work into this story. And it was done by comedian Shane Gillis. So through this story, I'm just going to drop in some of his uh, um, uh, unbelievable stand up about George Washington and the Battle of Trenton.
Painting of George crossing the Delaware, standing. He's the only one standing on the rowboat. Everyone else is like, George, you got to get down. George's like, they're over there, get them. You know what happened that day when George crossed the Delaware? It was Christmas Day, and it was a bit of a massacre because George caught the British off guard because the British absolutely correctly assumed. They were like, only a retarded guy's going to try to cross.
So there's absolutely more to this story than just that. But if you know, you're going to see most of that skit tonight. It's absolutely incredible. So the war before Trenton, and like I said, we were in trouble. As an army, the Continental Army was taken a beating all over New York and gets chased across the New Jersey. By December, Washington is on the western bank of the Delaware in Pennsylvania, what is now, I believe, Bucks County, trying to hold together, a few thousand guys. Chat room, don't worry, I won't be showing that video. But he's got just a few thousand guys, and it's winter, and it has not been a good winter. It has been a very cold, miserable, snowy winter. And when you're running low on everything, that just makes it worse. The, the Continental Army regulars were down to minimum clothing, certainly not weather prepared clothing. Some of them didn't even have proper shoes in general, never mind boots to be handling the snow and the ice and everything like that. And a lot of the enlistments of these Army regulars were set to expire. They were all ready to go home. And some of them weeks away from going home, some of them days. And Washington told Congress straight out that he is depending on these people who are right around the corner from going home and being out of this war. It's a precarious situation. And it shows you by the end of the story how committed the cause for liberty was. There was also a pamphlet, a famous pamphlet that was put out at that time by Thomas Paine called The American Crisis. And it was passed around in all the camps before the Battle of Trenton to try to calm some of the guys and motivate them. And the most famous line from that is, "These are times that try men's souls." And that was one that seemed to really stick with a lot of the Colonial Army regulars. Now, on the other side of the river, you have General William Howe, who decides that they're going to set up shelter on the other side. It's not like now. There would be massive breaks between battles because of weather, distance, time, and the ability to forge through all of those. So he sets up a chain of outposts all over New Jersey, and one of them is, of course, Trenton. From the British perspective, as Shane Gillis said in his skit, there is no way that they thought that Washington would even show up. They didn't even think that Washington could hold out for the winter. They thought the rebellion was completely just disintegrating, and time and weather was on the British side. And then there's the part about the Hessians. A lot of people don't know who the Hessians were. So the Hessians, it sounds like an insult today, but in 1776, they were German troops hired by the Brits to fight against the Americans. Many of them came from a region called Hesse-Kassel and other German states. They were trained soldiers. They weren't even, they're oftentimes depicted in some people's history of being less than militiamen or barely militiamen. But they weren't. They drilled. They were units. They were fighting units. They had uniforms. They were absolutely part of this fight against the Americans, and they were pretty formidable. They had 3 regiments in Trenton and a troop of British light horse. In Washington's intelligence, there was about 1,500 men sitting over there under the command of Colonel Johann Rall. And their mission, as you would expect, was very easy: to hold Trenton, control all the roads, all the pathways, all the trails, and anchor all of New Jersey essentially through the winter. Like I said, they were just sitting there hoping the time and the weather would beat the Colonials for them. There was also this myth flying around that they were all drunk, all the Hessians were partying and da 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 da. They weren't. There's no substantial evidence to back that up. Were they tired? Yes. Was their guard down? Because again, the weather was unbelievable, and nobody thought for a second that Washington was going to try it. Oh, you know, there we go. Hate when you go to hit a button and it just destroys everything.
Christmas Day, and it was a bit of a massacre because George caught the British off guard, because the British absolutely correctly assumed, they were like, only a retarded guy's going to try to cross this icy river today in a rowboat. Fortunately for them, our first president was on the other side of that river. It's like, get in the boat, we got to kill these motherfuckers for...
So that's where we're at. You have Washington on the other side, who is just ready to pull off the impossible, and you have Brits and the Hessians on the other side who aren't expecting it. Washington's goal was to raid with consequence. In other words, not only did he want to make an impression, yeah, that was important, but he wanted it to be fruitful, to be successful. He wanted prisoners. He wanted to get their supplies because everybody knew they needed them. And he wanted to lay a blow to the confidence. You can understand, like I said, the morale of the English was very high, unbelievably high. And on the other side of the Patriots and the Continental Army, it was very low. Washington came up with a three-pronged operation. The main force would cross north of Trenton. The second force, under John Cadwalader, is meant to cross near Bristol to pressure an enemy post down there. And a third force, James Ewing, is supposed to cross at Trenton Ferry and seize the bridge at Assunpink to block the escape. So they have a plan, a bold plan, because it involved getting artillery over the river, as you're about to hear. And then the weather decided to say, screw you, we're going to make this next to impossible. And it kicked up, and it was violent, windy, freezing snow. The river, much like depicted in many of the paintings, was full of ice, which is okay if you have an aluminum or steel boat, because it wasn't sheets upon sheets of ice. But these are essentially wooden rowboats. The storm was so violent that Cadwalader and Ewing could not get their artillery across. And without the artillery, the trap that Washington's trying to spring is next to impossible. So Washington goes anyways, because he's George. And, he's not going to bow down to the weather or anybody else, apparently. The force he takes with him is 2,400 men. And I think we don't have a good depiction from that infamous painting of how many people crossed that river with Washington that day. It's 2,400. Henry Knox is in charge of the crossing and the artillery and the 18 cannons. And somehow, in all of the chaos, after Washington took off, they were able to launch to get the artillery across. So things are starting to get good again. A little bit bad, a little bit good. According to the National Museum of the United States Army, every soldier is issued 3 days of rations, 40 rounds, 40. They synchronized watches, they synchronized attack. They were absolutely adamant to keep noise down, talking minimum. Troop obedience was a must, and speed was a must. This was essentially kind of an early special forces raid. The equivalent, 02 AMT says that the 2400 is the equivalent of 3 short battalions today. Yeah, so it's a lot of men. But this was kind of a special forces of the day, so to speak. Now, obviously, our special forces work in much smaller units today because of ability, technology, equipment, yada, 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 and training. But you have to think back in 1776, all that stuff didn't really exist. And we were back, like I said, where everybody was lining up on one side or the other and taking volleys at each other. That's where warfare was. And the Patriots, using the militiamen mostly, they found a way where they would hit ragtag guerrilla squadron style attacks, and it was working for them. But this is, and I'm not a military historian, so I'm not going to pretend to know, but 2,400 men on a secret mission trying to cross the Delaware, high risk. I'm guessing that this would probably be the equivalent of maybe 800 special operators today. Less, maybe 500, 600, all going at the same time. This is a big deal. By the way, I asked earlier what the password was, and now that we're past the point of the planning in the story, I'm going to tell you the password for the operation of crossing the Delaware and the Battle of Trenton was victory or death. That was the password. So that tells you the importance that Washington and other leaders knew how much weight was into this attack, was into this battle. Trying to see, there we go. So the crossing begins on Christmas night of all times. Christmas night. You got to think, even if you're a colonial, you got to, and you're an Army regular for the Continental Army, you got to think, all right, well, at least we get Christmas off. No, George was like, yeah, we're going. They set off from McConkey's Ferry, and he wants to have his troops over the river by midnight and into Trenton before dawn. In his head, that's the timeline that they have to meet to be successful and launch a surprise attack. However, with the amount of ice in the river and not artillery over until 3 a.m., the troops did not step off from the other side, from landing towards Trenton until 4 a.m. And this is the moment that Washington realizes whatever the 1776 equivalent of shit. He probably said that. It could very well have been shit. But he knew at that point they were not going to hit Trenton by first light. And their element of surprise was now dwindling on this unbelievably important attack. But he also knows that they have to kind of follow through. I mean, the risk of trying to get everybody back over the river and set up for maybe another day, and maybe, you cut your losses with the Christmas surprise and some other stuff, but maybe you can regroup and try it again. It's just not worth it. They already have everyone on the other side. He makes a calculated risk, and off they march. By the way, keep going back to the painting because I'm trying to be historically accurate. Where they crossed, I know in that painting, it makes the river look huge. It was pretty quick moving, even with the ice. That was the bigger issue. But it wasn't miles wide like there is in the painting. It's probably about 300 to 400 yards wide at the point where he crossed. Still treacherous, still dangerous. It wasn't an ocean. But it's also important to realize that 300 yards back in that day was what they would look at as, ooh, I don't know if we can make this. That's kind of far. That shows you the equipment that they had. I think, as I sit here in front of all this technology and we drive around in this massive technology, we get into planes all the time and cruises, that we don't realize how primitive not only was the war but the equipment that they had to fight it with. So off we go. They have 9 miles to march from the time they get boots on the ground to the time they get to Trenton. From the crossing of Trenton through snow, hail, and wind, the dudes are wet. I mean, they're soaked. They're marching through the elements. Shoes are falling apart. Musket and gunpowder is damp, which is unbelievably bad. But they keep going. They know they have to stick together, and they know they have to go. And even those who weren't sure a few days ago were now on board. They're ready to march. They're ready to fight. Probably still apprehensive, but they're putting their money where their mouth is, so to speak. He sets them up in 2 columns. One column takes the lower road. The other one takes Upper Pennington Road, it's called. And the orders were simple. Once the outguards are forced back, push straight into town and hit the enemy before they can form up. He wanted, this is a guerrilla hit. This is a move, man. Before they can regroup, before they can set their defense, before they can really launch a counterattack, we got to get in. We got to hit them hard and hit them fast. It's a street fight in Trenton, which, still happens today. And at first contact, Washington reports the upper division hit the enemy's advance post at 8 a.m. Within minutes, the other column on the lower road is engaged as well.
I can't believe we defeated.
The Hessian outguards, as they call them, they fight and they fall back, firing from behind houses. It's street to street. It's the battle. It's funny how, as much as warfare has changed, some things have not. They're firing from behind houses. They're firing on the move. They weren't asleep. They weren't helpless. They weren't drunk, as I said earlier. No, they're reacting. But Washington caught them off guard. The plan's starting to work. There's a little bit of hope on the horizon. The Hessians reacted, but they reacted late. Washington's troops pushed fast, and I mean fast for that time. From everything that I've read in researching this, they were just pushing. They seized part of the Hessian artillery early. Huge. Take the artillery out. Enormous. The Hessians form up, but then they hesitate. And they try to file off and march towards Princeton. And that hesitation gives Washington the chance to throw troops in front of them. He knew what they were trying to do. It's so funny. When you go back, you look at the founders, people who don't like the founders that write quote unquote military history books argue all the time whether or not Washington, I've seen so many examples. Oh, he wasn't a good tactician. He didn't really understand war. He got lucky a lot. But no, he recognized, hey, the Hessians were about to beat feet and try to head off to Princeton where they would be backed. And he got an element out in front of them, cut off the route. And at one point, the Hessians realized, hey, we're hosed and we're surrounded. And they surrender. Washington reports getting 23 officers and 886 men to lay down their arms. So we're just over 900 people. Colonel Rall, who is in charge of the Hessians and the Brits, is wounded in the battle and he later dies. Casualties were lopsided. Now, you remember, you're going against a fortified position. Yes, it was Christmas, the day after Christmas. Yes, it was early in the morning. Yes, they were maybe caught off guard, but they were still fortified. They had a quote-unquote fort. They had set artillery. They had the upper hand. Even though they were being overwhelmed 2-1 with numbers, they still have the upper hand. We're talking muskets, right? We're talking small artillery that can be moved relatively easy, so to speak, back in the day. Muskets are not entirely accurate. They're slow to load. Yes, I mean, muskets can be accurate on one shot, and then the next shot, it could hit the guy sitting next to you, for goodness sakes. This wasn't like a strike like you think of today. And they had 2-1 odds numbers-wise, yeah. But against a fortified position, that's not great odds, so to speak. And the casualties were unbelievably lopsided in favor of the Americans. They lost 5 Americans by wounds. By wounds. Not even dead. They were just wounded. On the Hessian sides, 22 killed, 83 wounded, with that 900 captured.
I believe we defeated the British. So
And I'm going to have Shane kind of sum some of that up for me right here.
defeated the British. So I know how we did it. We had a fucking 6'2" redheaded Florida guy out in the woods just waiting for those dude. 6'2" in 1770. That's like 6'10" today. Red hair, horse teeth, a sword, just. You want to tax me, motherfucker? You know how terrifying that guy was coming out of the woods. Just, Some 5-foot British guy. Oh! Run, it's George. You know what happened that day?
So, yeah. So, against what should be seemingly all odds, and it was, because of the weather, because of just the setup, the lack of equipment, having to cross a river, Washington and company kicked some ass, and they kicked it bigly, so to speak. And why was this battle important? As I mentioned earlier, they didn't have a lot of leverage when it came to negotiating with the British. The British, like I said, were kicking everybody's ass for a while. And they had no leverage. They had minimum supplies. So this wasn't just a headline to show in the newspapers in America, hey, we can beat the British in certain battles. While that helps morale, the reality is it got you prisoners. And back then, prisoners mattered a lot. Not only did they pull manpower off the battlefield, but it creates leverage. It's something to negotiate with in some cases. And it also showed that not only winter was not going to be a factor for the colonials, but they weren't as weak as the British were thinking they were. They also got materials. They got weapons and stores, food, clothing, you name it. Which, like I said, guys going into that battle, some of them weren't even wearing proper shoes or boots. You know, they had canvas or whatever wrapped around their legs. They didn't have winter clothing. They were in tatters. Some of them were still in summer uniforms. And a lot of them weren't being replaced because A, the colonials didn't have it, and B, a lot of them were just days from being out. So for the British, you're losing supplies and men, and for the colonials, for the Continental Army, for the Patriots, you're now gaining it. In Washington's notes, he said the town does not contain major magazines, but the raid still brings back prisoners and captured artillery. And he didn't stay. And that was what was amazing too. He had to come back across because of the limited numbers. He had to go back to the other side so he could start to regroup. This was a raid of strategy for effect. This was sending a message and seeing how Western Union didn't exist back in the day. I don't think it did. Washington said it himself. He didn't want to occupy it. He didn't necessarily need the fort, but they needed the resources. They needed the prisoners, which they got, and a message was sent. And you have to put it in context. Before this battle, the British thought they had Washington contained. Like I said, they thought they had winter on this side, and they thought everything was dwindling out. On the other side, Washington knew this was a huge battle. He knew the same thing the British thought. That time was running out. The army was cold. It was worn down, and it was falling apart. We were on the precipice of losing this war. And honestly, centuries of bad food and British rule. But the story of Trenton changes that for the nation, for the army, for the Congress, for the leadership, because that one battle proves to everybody, including the British, that the revolution wasn't dead. In the worst time of year to attack, with the worst amount of resources, having to cross this river with ice chunks flowing down it and attack a fortified position, It showed that the British can be defeated and the Continental Army can kick some ass when it needed to. It also broke up the chain of outposts that the British had on that side. And the British noted that. They knew two things after that battle. They were vulnerable even in winter, and that Washington can and will take a risk, but he will execute when he does. Think about the message that sends when you're so high up on the hog, so to speak, if you're British military leaders. I always think back at the point in the movie The Patriot, where Cornwallis is essentially stuck up against the ocean, and he's looking out the window and he's essentially watching his army loses. I think that was the moment for the Brits from the Battle of Trenton. I think they realized after that if they can lose that battle, they can lose the war. And that, think about what that does to the troop morale for the Redcoats. And it was an open and punch in what was called the 10 Crucial Days. Washington crossed the Delaware. He fights again in Assunpink, and then he wins at Princeton. Those 10 days, those three battles, they reset victory in the Continental Army and for the revolutionaries. It got their confidence going. It got them boosting, and it got more recruits. It got recruitment skyrocketed after the message of these three victories went out. They helped keep men in ranks in the Continental Army. In other words, people weren't just quitting and walking away. They weren't arguing. They weren't being lazy. They weren't trying to get out of things. It motivated them. It made them look at Washington as the leader that he was, and they respected that and they trusted him. And that pushed them long enough to get to places like Saratoga, where foreign support, the French specifically, became possible. Sorry. So you got to think, if they collapsed in that December 1776 battles, there's no other milestones. There was no path to victory, so to speak. A lot of historians look back and said the Battle of Trenton had to happen and it had to be won, and the odds were against them, and they did it. And you don't have any of those other major battles afterwards if you don't win that one. So I bring that up, and one of the reasons back in the Sackhead days that we used to tell stories like this, and we did a whole bunch of individual stories, and sometimes we do battles, and then sometimes we would just do important moments of history, like maybe something that Congress was talking about, whatever, is because I think we understood then, and I certainly understand now more and more, that liberty in this country is almost inherited like an old car. People are like, oh yeah, my dad gave it to me and it's okay, I guess. And then some people are like, oh my God, my dad gave it to me and it's not a Ferrari. Ew, fuck this. And I think it's important that we start telling some of these stories more and more, that we start reminding the youth. And that's my hope with this. Yes, it's my Christmas show. I'm wearing a red shirt and a green hat. Yes, this is related to Christmas, but it's also related to what my show is, The Edge of Liberty, and what SHR stands for, which is, yeah, we are absolutely a conservative network, 100%. But we also are like that because of the history that we have in this country and the importance of liberty, and where we would be if these people who had next to nothing, who were living barely in tents, who didn't even have the right equipment, did not stand up against a crown that was just crushing them, so to speak. Comments from the chat. We're at 701 subscribers. Thank you from the Phantom. I appreciate that. 02 AMT says, I've read in some books that Robert Rogers offered his troops ranges to President Washington and he was turned down, which caused them to help the British. Yeah, that would be an interesting one to look up. I didn't really touch on that here because it obviously it didn't kind of fit into the story. But if you go through a lot of what did and didn't happen and what panned out and what didn't pan out, and decisions that were made, it's kind of crazy that we got to this point where we actually won. Because there was a lot of things that went sideways completely and a lot of things that worked out. Look, we didn't know the French were going to show up until they showed up, right? We had their diplomats, we had a couple of their military leaders over here telling us they were coming. Yeah, we had people over in France too, but until the French showed up, they weren't there. And nobody thought, there was great debate on whether or not they could be trusted. And the French, once they landed, did have a major impact on that, and that can't be forgotten. But the Continental Army under Washington and America in general was not living and like the French were coming. They were living like they were dying. They were fighting like they were going to die. They were fighting like they were going to lose it all. And if they had done that, I don't know. Who knows? Maybe I would not be able to sit here and say, Merry Christmas. This is the story of the Battle of Trenton, and this is the story of crossing the Delaware. So I'm hoping I'm going to do more of these in the future. I think it's important. I think hopefully people can learn something from this, and I hope people can appreciate something from this. I know a lot of my show and a lot of just conservative shows out there right now, we're always angry and screaming. We're always talking about everything that's going wrong. We're always talking about how things are going shithouse south. And we're not talking about the good things that happened so we can sit here and be free and have conversations like this. And I can have a show where I get to actually speak my opinion. And outside of some lunatic being angry about it, the government can't do shit about it. And that was what the founders wanted. That is what our country is based off of. That freedom of speech, that liberty. Obviously, we can go through all the amendments at some point. That's fine. But that's why they fought so hard in battles like this. So idiots like me can sit in front of a microphone and a camera and tell the story. And on my regular shows, give the opinions that I have. And I have the right to do that. So thank you for joining me. I know it's Christmas Eve. I know you guys could have been anywhere. So to the people in chat who showed up, thank you. To the people watch live everywhere else, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you to KLRN, who will be simulcasting this, I think, tomorrow. And it may not be until the day after tomorrow. I'm trying to remember what day of the week it is. It's Wednesday now, so it may not be till Friday. But I appreciate them simulcasting. I appreciate you. Please like and subscribe. Please share this. I'm going to be putting the podcast version of this up shortly. Actually, that might be done tomorrow because I do have a party to get to today. So I said this was going to be a special. I didn't say it was going to go an hour long, so it's not going to go an hour long. But I will be back Monday, 8 p.m. Pacific, right here on the SHR Media Network. Please check out all the shows on the SHR Media Network. You have Reverb Common Sense Monday, Friday, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 on the East Coast. Jersey Joe, who's also writing for SHR Media, doing a bang-up job over there. You have Mission Ready Men with Big E, Tuesday and Thursday mornings, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon on the East Coast. And he's also been writing and doing a hell of a job. BZ's Berserk Bobcat Saloon every Tuesday, Thursday night, 8 p.m. Pacific, 11 on the East Coast. The Lost Wanderer Show, 5 p.m. Pacific on Sundays on the SHR Media YouTube. It is an honor for us to be able to carry his show. Thank you so much. Merry Christmas to you. I will talk to you before the new year. And if you're like me and you are spent the day making 1826 eggnog riot eggnog, where I used the recipe that they used in 1826 at the cadet mutiny that took place at West Point, look it up. It's a real thing. And they were really hammered. And I found that recipe, and that's what I'm bringing to the party tonight. So I hope you have a wonderful time. BZ is doing writing. I'm sorry. BZ's written a couple articles. Gosh, you miss one thing, and you never forget it. Merry Christmas, folks.